Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Near Death podcast, where we talk about life, death and experiences in between. I'm Kirsty Salisbury, the host of the show, and I trust that the conversations within this podcast will offer value, insight and information into what happens in the afterlife. To find out more about the free online community and extra content, be sure to click subscribe and to check out the links in the notes below. And now, let's get into today's episode.
I was in a playground of September of 1993, and I had whooping cough, and as a result of whooping cough, I suffocated while going up on a slide, climbing a ladder onto a slide and going down a slide. The last thing that I remember just going, and I just felt this large crack in my brain, this large, incredible sound in my brain. But when you suffocate and you go through that, it was scary. And it felt like this place of eternity where I was in this place where I wasn't exactly in my body and I wasn't crossed over. In the moment, it was profound. In the moment, it was just too powerful when I was looking at eternity almost in the face of the eye and seeing what I could best describe as the eternal light of God.
Welcome back to the Let's Talk Near Death podcast, where we talk about life, death, and experiences in between. Today, I'm chatting with Jacob Cooper. He's already been on the show, but there was so much information and so much goodness in our conversation that I wanted to get him back on. And we realized that we hadn't actually done a formal episode to hear about Jacob's near-death experience. So Jacob had a near-death experience at age 3, and through that, he's learnt all sorts of different things. Today, he shares his insight about the mystery of life and on the other side of the veil. He's also a Certified Reiki Master, a Certified Hypnotherapist who specializes in Past Life Regression Therapy. He's a psychotherapist, and through his work, he works with individuals, groups, and families in managing emotional barriers and improving their wellness. So many things in there. Jacob's experience provides others with the opportunity to experience past life memories and assist in the development of self-awareness and finding meaning within their experiences. So Jacob, we've already been chatting for a little while. Welcome to the Let's Talk Near Death podcast show again.
A true pleasure. And I'm also the latest author of Life After Breath, which came out a couple months ago. So that's been a fun, but such a pleasure. And I love listening to your work. And I'm just really, truly honored to be one of your many featured guests here. It's a true privilege of mine to be here today.
Oh, thank you, Jacob. Like I say, we've already been chatting for quite a bit. There is so much we could chat about, but I thought I'd better hit record and include all of this juicy conversation for everybody else who's tuning in today. So, Jacob, you had a near-death experience at age 3. What happened? How does someone remember the near-death experience at age 3? Take us back.
Sure. As a psychotherapist, that's one of the more controversial elements of my near-death experience. And I view controversy as good because that causes a shakeup of consciousness and causes people to look at the reality and the nature of it a little bit differently. But I guess some of the predominant questions from, ever since I became public was, you were 3 years old. I mean, how do you remember it? Who remembers anything from such a young age with such profound details and matter of fact? And then the other question I always get is, what vantage point are you telling this? Is this 3 decades later? Is this you in the moment? We will get to all that, but on the surface, I do firmly believe I'm able to recall this for many reasons, but the first from the ground up was the severity of trauma. Those familiar with trauma, understand how it defies logic in terms of recollection. It's a moment in time that you could have at any point, even beyond this lifetime, that was so profound, so life-altering, that it's embedded and ingrained in your own memory. And I do believe I had trauma as a result of suffocation, due to contracting a highly contagious upper respiratory, fatal virus that I had called whooping cough, which for infants or children could be fatal if left untreated. And I, at the time, was non-vaccinated. So there's a lot of crossover with the release of the book and obviously the macro condition in the world with that. And that was really an impetus behind choosing the title of Life After Breath. And how do we find a life when we feel on one level or an indirect level, breathless or lifeless. How do we
Mm.
gain that light? And I do believe my near-death experience is an allegorical standpoint to really answer some of those questions in its microcosm. But yes, that was September of 1993. I am giving my age away. I was 3 years old. It was right before the Jewish high holiday of the Day of Atonement or Yom Kippur, a day where your soul is getting ready to meet its creator. And you're trying to have a year of renewal, a year of health, prosperity. It's a great year of manifestation on the Jewish calendar, which is, the religious background that I was bought into. I always say religion is something that you're taught, spirituality is innate and something that you're born with beyond this lifetime.
Oh, I
But
like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a good one. I wish that was mine, but that's a quote I've seen by someone else. But that's so true. That's the thing today. It's nearly every thought has ever been made, but I always say every dance has ever been danced before, but no one has danced the dance or sung the song the way that you can. And so that's a
Exactly.
unique element of all these experiences, is to make it yours. But I was in a playground of September of 1993, and I had whooping cough. And as a result of whooping cough, I suffocated while going up on a slide, climbing a ladder onto a slide and going down a slide within a park. And due to the deprivation of oxygen, everything in my body shut down. And the last part of my body that I was aware of was my brain. And I was aware and able to feel all the different components and parts of my brain. And due to the deprivation of oxygen, that was the last thing that I remember just going, and I just felt this large crack in my brain, this large, incredible sound in my brain, just like this loud, incredible sound. It was kind of like fireworks we had the 4th of July, just this. And then
Mm.
once that plug was pulled, once my brain snapped in half or felt like that, that's when God and the universe came in. And within my near-death experience, I don't think any of this was new. It was rather familiar within my own backyard. I had a reunification with my own spiritual guides, my soul family members, angels. I was aware of previous lifetimes, karmic understanding of what some of this lifetime was about. And I was given an option, obviously, staying within the other side or continuing on my lifetime. There was also an awareness of, I would say, the all that ever was and will be, and the best word to describe that, I guess you could say, as God, within
Mm.
this near death experience. The biggest takeaway that I had was so many things, but how this lifetime is not a mundane, trivial physical existence where we're here to satisfy the material world.
Mm.
Beyond that, we're here to work through the material world, but there's such a higher intelligence, a higher awareness that we're tied into, far greater than just our body and our name. And just that was very true to me. When I peeled off the layers of this human illusion, I was able to see past this as a divine orchestrated guided path with a far greater intelligence on this path that was before me. There's so many layers, and I hope to get to many of them. And I'm sorry for the vagueness of the description. We could get into some more of the pinpoint focus as we get on. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. I love that you've talked about so much and you've talked about that clarity, because even as I asked you that question to start with, how does a 3-year-old remember a near-death experience? I also realized that these experiences are so vivid and so real, and there's so much to them that it's often very hard to put them into a particular description or define them within a 1 or 2 minute conversation. So totally understand where you're coming from with that. I guess what's going through my mind, and what listeners generally love to hear, is what were you experiencing at the time? So you talked about the fireworks, your brain, you felt like it cracked. That was the last part of your body that you felt connected to. What happened? Like, do you remember coming out of your body? Do you remember, you said that you saw past family
Sure,
members,
sure.
angels?
The best word I could describe it as a roller coaster ride. It had a lot of euphoric elements to it, but a lot of despair. The despair moments was when I was suffocated in this incubational period that felt like eternity, when I suffocated. And we're so used to the regularity of the breath that we don't recognize the gift of it and how that unless you're on assisted breathing machines, that makes us really alive in this body. And once that's taken from you, so we have words, but you just suffocation. You're like, okay. But when you suffocate and you go through that, it was scary. And it felt like this place of eternity where I was in this place where I wasn't exactly in my body and I wasn't crossed over. I was just kind of in this incubational period. I was out of my body. And the reason why I did that was my body was not operating properly. It was suffocated. It was deprived of oxygen. And so kind of like if you have a car, your car's not starting, you're not going to just sit in the car and try to rev up your engine. You're going to get outside the car, you're going to look at the engine and what's kind of going on. And so for me, that's what happened when my body wasn't working. We are just spiritual beings in this human body. And so I was able to really access much more of my being past the limitations of the body. Awareness as a result was increased due to the lack of limitations of the filter of the body. But I was disembodied and I was able to have a much greater intelligence that I would in a limited body. With that, I was also aware of form that I had, the form of the soul, the form of my energy body. You could call it an auric field or many different terms, but I was aware that I had, or my soul still had form. It wasn't physical, but it felt like shadow. And the most frustrating element, and I could certainly understand how spirits feel when they cross over, is I was able to be aware of the people that were calling my name that I went to the park on that day. And they were calling my name and they were shaking my body. And I wanted to shake them back to let them know that, dude, that's not me. That was never me. It was just a one-sided, frustrating conversation where I could see them, but they couldn't see the real me. And that feeling in some way lasts until this day, where just feeling like people just see the surface of you, but not the real you. And that was frustrating because people are limited just at times in terms of what they could really feel and see. And I took that as a motivation to get a better understanding and ownership of who I truly was, even if that understanding was deprived or wasn't there with other people.
Wow, there's so much in that, isn't there? So much. When you said that you saw other loved ones, angels, spiritual beings, what happened there? How did you feel? Did you understand who they were? What was going on in the spiritual world that you were half in?
Right. If I could best describe the feeling, within just a phrase, it would be all is well. When you say all is well, you say that in our world, even at the age of 3, we're so programmed with linearity. We're so programmed for transactional lifestyle, where on Wednesday we eat that pizza, we're going to feel good. And there's a future planning of time, and there's a chronology of an order of things. This was taken out of time into eternal bliss, eternal awareness, and a sensation that I and life itself was perfect just as it was. And the feeling that I wasn't judged by what I did, but rather who I was, who I eternally was, which was much more than the limited version that we see in ourselves in the world at times could see of ourselves too, as this timeless, infinite, wise being, the part of us that is the best way to describe is the expression of divinity. And I think that's all of who we are. And so it was burning away all of the false sense of reality that I might have been blinded by and the forgetfulness to come into a greater sense of awareness of all that was around me and all that I was and a part of, far more than I had prior to that moment in that lifetime.
Were you aware that you were dead?
I was aware that I was alive.
I've never heard that. I love it.
I never felt more alive. And that to me was the greatest victory of them all. Just the diametric difference within there is no time, but moments where I felt the uttermost suffering, the moments later on the polarity of it, I never felt a greater extent of euphoria. But it was a familiarity. It wasn't something that was foreign. It was foreign to those 3 years that I had on the planet, but it was a world that was home, the best way I could
Mm,
describe it, and something that I knew that I might have left it, but it would never leave me. And
mm,
I
mm.
might have forgotten it, but the kingdom of heaven would never forget who I am. And what happened was it was very awkward. It was awkward in a sense that in the moment I was deprogramming myself for what I saw myself at 3 years old, but then to be privy to all this information and awareness of past lives and different roles and all this stuff, it was a lot for a chronological 3-year-old to take in.
Yeah,
Because on
yeah,
one hand, you're stuck to that ego, you're stuck to that temporary identity. On the other hand, you take that off and you're like, wow, that is the biggest lie and the biggest illusion that I
yeah.
could ever have. And so, in a way, it just, the best way I could describe it was almost kind of I left the body, but I also left that 3-year-old behind in many ways in that temporary identity. I was able to see past it. And there's this whole new awareness beyond myself as a 3-year-old. We're just this timeless being, this timeless soul that was not limited by chronological age and time.
Mm. I know that you've done quite a lot of work in this area since you've been back and since you've grown into who you are today. How much do you think of that knowledge got left behind? Do you feel like you can tap into everything that happened, or was it too big, too vast to be able to utilize today?
There are some visualizations of the near death experience that will never be erased from my mind or my heart. It's encountering angels. I'm not allergic to angels. Give me a moment. Um, that's a sign, right? A sign that they're here, they're around. But what I would say, the other side is not a place that you could point to and say that's there. You can't.
Yeah,
It's like, could you point to the internet? It's everywhere. It's a part of
yeah,
everything.
yeah.
And so what I learned was, yes, there were points and moments in time when I would access higher tapestries and higher awareness of the eternal light on the other side, but it was also very much overlaying this reality. And so I think people have just a monopolization or a limitation of what is labeled as infinite. But then infinite is not infinite, it is a finite awareness. And so what I really learned was infinite is everywhere. It's right in
Mm,
front of us, but then it could also feel like a zillion miles away too. There's no limitation for
mm,
it. What I experienced was the angelic realm and the spirit guides, and all these things were right overlaying this reality. They're right here. They're not, they could travel millions of miles away, but they are also here too. And so there's this thin veil overlaying this reality, and they're all around us. And so that's just one of the lasting images that I had when my brain wasn't working, when I crossed over, was just this thin veil of awareness that I could literally see, as if you take a radio dial and you tune it up a little bit higher, and there's this thin veil of frequency overlaying this physical reality. And the reason why I don't think you can see it is because it's higher vibrational. Much like if you have a fan on, it's very hard to see the individual fans. It's vibrating so quickly that with the physical eye, you can't see it. You know, this vibrates at a slower rate. It doesn't mean that it's not somewhere or there too. But there's elements that are a lot visually clearer within my mind and some finer details. But the overarching components of it are clear as anything. And I could go back to that moment in time and it's very clear. But some parts of it visually is so profound for me. In the moment, it was profound. In the moment, it was just too powerful when I was looking at eternity almost in the face of the eye and seeing what I could best describe as the eternal light of God. Or to me, God is just the most climactical force that you could possibly imagine. You know, the highest
mm,
pinnacle of this reality, where there's no
mm,
end of climactical awareness. And that's kind of what I was experiencing. And I think in our bodies, we're used to just a cap on that. Whatever we do, there's always a limitation. And so I think we're all vibrating at certain rates. And I think we're here to embody God in each and every lifetime and learn different ways to ascend, to climb higher, and to vibrate to who we are and what we're forever connected to, and not be separate of that, and to
mm.
be loving eternal awareness and manifestation of our true nature. But there are elements that will never leave me, and some components, my left brain might struggle with. For instance, the clear name of my spirit guides. At the moment, they were right there. I saw them to the left and right side of me. To this day, I have ideas, but my left brain right doubts. So that part was like frustrating, and I don't see them as clearly as some of the other angelic beings as I did, but I still have recollection, my spirit
Mm,
guides. But the angels were the clearest thing that I remembered. That to me was clear as crystal to this day when I look back on it. So,
that's
yeah.
amazing, isn't it? And do you feel, I don't know if I've understood correctly, do you feel like as you've gotten older and further away from being a 3-year-old child, that those memories or the ability to recognize these angels has diminished at all? Has that got less strong? It's not a very good way of describing it, but
No, I would say the more connected I really am throughout the day, the stronger that becomes. When I get in my own head, sometimes you could intellectualize it or lose
yeah.
the full extent of the experience. But when I'm really at the core of my essence, that becomes a lot clearer. It's something that never truly leaves me. And age is different. When you have an eternal experience, it just sticks with you. And the element of the near-death experience is, yes, technically you look back on it, but it's eternity, and
Mm,
it's an eternal experience. But when I look back on my experience, I go through it. I go through all the steps of it. I live it again in my own
mm,
way.
mm,
And it's something in many ways that I'm grateful for, but also led to a lot of complexities
sure.
earlier in life, without question.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure. I'd like to go back to some of those earlier years. Before your near death experience, did you have any inkling that something might happen? A lot of people I speak to, and myself as well, I knew that something was going to happen in my lifetime. I couldn't tell you what. I thought I was going to get extremely unwell, extremely sick, didn't know it was going to play out how it did. But did you have any reason to suspect anything? Did you feel connected spiritually? Or what was life like before you were at the top of the slide when you're 3 years old?
To answer your question, absolutely. And I speak about this in Life After Breath. I think with trauma, you're able to remember surrounding events within the near-death experience or other profound, traumatic experience. But yes, I was aware that something was going to happen. I even woke up in night terrors. And so
Oh,
when
do
I was
you?
having my near-death experience, it's just kind of almost like a deja vu-like sensation where I just almost felt like I was going through my past, like I've already had this experience or had premonitions of it already.
Mm,
And as a kid, that was always frustrating to me. I would always have premonitions, and to me, it just felt like you took away time and you already stepped into moments in time, and then you were replaying it, and it's just frustrating. It was kind of like annoying when you already see something and you go through it, and you're like, God, could I just live and just go through the chronology of things? And so
mm,
it almost felt like I skipped a couple of steps and then went backwards. And then I had this experience.
mm.
I was aware of a couple of steps ahead premonitions. But when I had it, it wasn't shocking. I think the
Yeah.
greatest shock was suffocation. That was the greatest shock to my system. But actually, what was happening, it didn't surprise me. It felt like there
Yeah.
was a knowing of what I would refer to as an exit point, which I think thin souls, it's embedded in us when we just have an inner knowing of when a profound moment in life will be, and when it is a point in time where we might exit this lifetime or decide to stay or be told to stay. And I think everyone at a certain point, cats are not the only ones with 9 lives. I think we have
Yeah.
multiple times to leave this body, and no matter who you are, whether it's a technical near-death experience or you had a near-death experience, there's been moments and times where you felt that exit point. And going through those moments, I'm sure you felt like you just seen this before. It was familiar.
Mm,
So yes,
mm.
and I'm glad we share that, and others do too, because this was an experience far greater than this was something very sacred and divined and orchestrated. I think it was definitely timed and contracted.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah, I feel very similar with mine that it was arranged before it happened. The deja vu, I have very specific memories of deja vu before I got sick. It's just amazing how it all plays out. And I can really connect with what you're saying. It really
Mhm.
resonates with me, which is great.
Yeah.
Gosh, so many things. I want to talk about a whole lot of the stuff, but I'm going to stick to the near-death experience for now.
Mm.
Coming back to near-death experience, you've had this experience. I think suffocating has got to be one of the most terrifying ways to go. I think
Right.
that is just utterly terrifying. But you talk about how it was okay in the moment. You just went through it. It was okay. And that's something that seems to be a theme as well, as when it's actually happening, we just relax into it and there isn't necessarily the fear past a certain point. So that's really helpful to know.
Mhm.
For none of us are getting out of here alive. So knowing that at some point it's all going to be okay. Do
It's a
you
small
remember?
moment in time. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is such a small moment.
Just goes.
Totally. Do you remember coming back into your body?
Yes, I do. I was
What was that
in
like?
a hospital bed, and my mother actually could attest to this. I chose to stay, and the moment where I chose was when my life re-began. And life really begins with the power of decision. Our thoughts influence our actions, and I think really that's a part of co-creation within this lifetime is the power of choice and the power to make your life how you design and how you want to architect it. And for me,
Mm,
I had the option, there was autonomy. I chose life in this body. But my mother, and I remember this, was I was very much enraged when I woke up in the hospital bed. And a couple days later, actually, my brother joined me in the hospital bed because he caught the upper respiratory virus too, whooping cough or
oh,
pertussis. So we were both there, but he didn't have the full extent of what I had. We caught it from a neighbor by us. But I was very much enraged. I do think that had a lot to deal with suppressed emotions and having this profound experience and not being able to have the verbiage to describe it. And I felt
mm,
just very buried and tortured in what I
mm,
wanted to say, but I just couldn't describe it. I couldn't have words and I was just aware of an intuitive understanding that my mother had no idea what I was going through, and I was not able to really articulate that. And for
mm,
me, and again, the deprivation of oxygen continued for almost 30 years allegorically with this profound experience. And wasn't until that I had the verbiage of it, that I started to share it, was when the afterlife presented itself in this life, and this near-death experience took away the word death and just had eternal life from the power and force that it was provided to with other people. I recognized that it wasn't about me, that this was an experience about other people and the collective consciousness. But I got so angry. My mother told me that I literally kicked the doctor and ran around the room because I was so infuriated by
yeah,
waking up after being in heaven to a cold
yeah,
hospital bed. And it wasn't anything against the doctor. He's a very sweet man. But I was furious,
yeah,
almost that here was the kid who turned down heaven, and now I was on this cold hospital bed, not able to express myself, very backed up. And that manifested itself in rage that I
yeah.
had. Yeah.
I am not surprised. I mean, what a shock from, yeah, heaven to here. Like
It was that's the
such a
word
shock.
shock. Yeah, yeah.
Yep, yep, absolutely.
It
You talk about how you were given the choice. Who gave you the choice? How did that play out? Was that an experience where you were somebody in there saying you can either come back, or was it just a knowing? What did that choice look like?
I think on the other side, we're used to speaking, but there's transparent communication. It's
Mm,
kind of like this collective, voiceless voice that you hear, and it's just this
mm,
harmonious octave from your angelic team to your guides to God. It's all a part of the higher realms. But it was just kind of like this voice and this knowing that I had this option of would I stay or this go, and just this eternal voice that we're always forever connected to. It's the voice of eternity that was speaking to me, but it was clear that I had a decision to make, and it was clear that I was ambivalent, that I was put in a difficult spot. To turn down heaven is no easy decision to make, and so I guess an advocate and posed questions as to if I were to stay, what would happen in this lifetime, and that's when different imagery came to me and different understanding of not only this lifetime, but other lifetimes, and really karmically, what was some of this lifetime about? And the reality was, as great as the other side was, bringing heaven down to earth was a unique window. And from this experience, I recognized that I held an awareness of that. Maybe other people didn't without having this experience. And I saw that I was to be a unique messenger of really our true nature and to really remember who we are, what we're forever connected to. And so I recognized the window of eternity was eternity. This was a finite moment in time, a finite window that I didn't want to turn down to integrate some of these higher principles and awareness.
Wow. Again, such a lot to be going through a 3-year-old's, I say head, you're in a spiritual form, but such a lot to consider. Have you ever had times in your life where you're going, what the heck? Why did I choose to come back? I've made the wrong choice.
I'm sure near-death experience or not, we've all had those moments.
Yeah.
But I find that there's a great power in surrender. Having my near-death experience, I viewed it as the ultimate school of the life that I would live. And every moment that I had, I don't so much focus on the narrative, but rather defining the narrative and having understanding of the higher wisdom of some of different parts of it. And that's been my real work. What happened, happened. What I make of it is my duty. But I would say when my near-death experience, when I was just in this surrender period, was when I was in a position to receive. And I think so many of us could really relate to that we're at a 0 point. We have an opportunity to really open ourselves up to infinite possibilities. That's when we're on autopilot, when we're a little bit blocked to change or to alter the course. And I think really life begins where it ends. And it has a new beginning, a new ending. And it's an eternal cycle of beginnings, middle, and eternity.
Yeah, wow. I'm going to have to get my head around that. Life begins where it ends, that it is eternity.
In order to find yourself, you have to find yourself or your nature of reality. You have to be willing to lose yourself in your viewpoint of reality.
Yeah.
A new tree cannot grow if an old tree doesn't come down before it, and that old tree breaks down and the new tree comes back. If every old tree were to stay there, we'd have no room for new trees. And I think it's the same thing with awareness. If we just have this stuck, fixed viewpoint of awareness, we have no room for other alternative, higher awareness to come into play.
That makes sense. Yeah. You've talked quite a bit through your discussion here, sharing your experience with us about how you could look at different things. You could see your life if you came back, how you talked about exit points, different opportunities within life. How much of life do you think is already pre-planned?
That's a wonderful question. I would say without question, the major points in our life have to be charted. I mean, the major points. It may not always be exactly what it did, but the overarching lessons and points are, I do believe, charted. But I think if we were just to be a creature of nature, then what would be the point of this? I think really our job is to overcome what was destined and to surpass what we laid out to. And so I think certainly there's a baseline in terms of events, but how we take those events, what we do with it, how do we face it, is really the more important concept that I have. I mean, you people who have every experience but have no experience, and people who have horrible experiences but they have every experience. And so I think it's really what we make of it that will define the course and trajectory of our evolutionary rates. But I do believe there is obviously free will, but also a very important component is our thoughts, our feelings, and our viewpoints. Because I think really the message that I was left in my near-death experience was how influential our thoughts are in the course of our lives. They really are so influential within our path and what we do, and to be keenly aware of how our thoughts are either working with us or against us, working with this eternal, infinite awareness that is guiding us, or for entrusting negative thoughts, doubts, fears over the eternal wisdom of higher awareness.
Absolutely. I mean, we're here, we're having a spiritual experience in a physical body. We hear that phrase all the time, but I'm very much about that physical experience as well, because we are in physical bodies.
Sure.
I've got this theory at the moment that we can't actually screw up, that we're here to live this life. There are some predestined things. Then we've got free will, we've got our choice. Like you say, we've got these exit points along the way. Do you think that we can screw this up? Do you think we can fail at life?
No, I mean, that's the world that we were
Yay.
brought up in, which is a very X and O, black and white kind of world. It's very
Yeah.
transactional and it's very linear. We have an experience and that's the end of it. We don't see that from that, there's a greater tapestry of change that could come from that period. And it's very
Mm,
hard to step forward if you haven't had a step backwards.
mm,
When is evolution or progress a one-way line upwards? It is never. It's hills, valleys, apexes, and
yeah.
I was listening to the late basketball Hall of Famer Kobe Bryant, who just passed away a year ago, with several other members on the helicopter ride, and someone asked him that
Mm,
same question. Here is like this alpha male, hardest working guy, a guy that you think like all gas, no brakes, don't mess up, don't this. And so someone asked him, "What do you think of failure?" He goes, "What do you mean? There's no such thing."
mm.
Was elaborate on that, Cobe. What do you mean? He said, well, if you fail on Monday, but if you learn from it Wednesday, how is that failure?
Mm,
How is that ever failure?
exactly.
And so I
Exactly.
think,
And
yeah,
underestimating the circumstances where you think about life reviews, we're going to have a full review of our life. We're going to understand how we've affected things. There's always the result of your actions. It doesn't mean that things won't play out differently because we chose things which weren't so good for us. If I could just think of that one word that sums it up, the listeners are probably going, oh, I know exactly what it is. We're going to make poor choices. I don't think we can mess this up, but there will be consequences for our choices and for our actions. So I think we need to be very aware of how we live our life and live a life that is as good and happy and loving as we can. But I do have this theory at the moment that we actually can't screw it up. That as long as we're living with our best intention, putting our best foot forward, that is actually enough. What do you think to that?
yes, and I do believe we're all here to play our own unique roles, and everyone's got their roles to play and lessons to learn. There's a micro evolution and there's a macro lesson, and I think certainly through tragedies that have happened, through unfortunate events, we all could look at those things and say, wow, from that, we were able in our own way to work through that and to evolve from that, to grow from
Mm,
that. So life isn't just a selective teacher where it gives you lessons in your wheelhouse, but everything else is not a lesson. I think it's all a part of growth. And I think it's learning how to generate an ability to embrace not just what we label as one thing and then ignore the other. I think it's finding ways to see things as all opportunistic and seeing things as life is not happening to me but for me,
mm,
and getting past the labels and seeing, okay, this happened, what could I do with it? How could I utilize this as a way to put my step forward? I think in a way when evolution and growth is how we define this life, then everything else becomes a quest for that. And we try to find that
mm,
in anything and everything that we encounter. So I think that really is a big part of how we see it. Versus life is happening to me, we become victim mentality. So I think it's very important
totally.
to balance, and recognize when we're in victim mentality versus the growth mindset, and which pendulum is weighing a little bit more heavy in our lifetimes.
Yeah, and because it does change, it does go back and forth quite a bit. So I
Like that
think,
figure eight, yeah.
yeah, exactly. I think so much of it is just tapping into every day, tapping into our moments,
Mm.
tapping into who we are, what we're meant to be doing. What would you say to somebody who hasn't had a near death experience? I get people all the time saying, I wish I could have the experience so I could have the understanding and I could have. It seems to be like a magic ticket that suddenly everything makes sense and everything's worked out, which I'll say after my own experience, that is not the case. But what would you say to somebody who's maybe searching a little bit deeper
Mhm.
to tap into knowing how they can live their best life and live with purpose and be on track, I suppose, with everything that we've talked about?
Right. I mean, I would say to a degree, we've all had trickles of consciousness of near death experiences. And I think this one year was a macro based near death experience. We're, in a sense, the playbook. You're on a comfortable rug, things are fine, things are fine. And then just that rug is pulled. And some
Mm,
people might struggle with illnesses and stuff like that, then have it. So it's not all one size fits all. But either way, the plug on the wall is being pulled and you're just put in this weird incubational period. And you're either forced to continue that road of suffering, or to allow yourself to surrender to something greater than yourself and to have that as a GPS guiding point behind moments of paralysis to generate a movement when you're down. And so I think it's really finding triumph during tragedies, as well as moments where you have shake-up periods in your lifetime to have that to alter the nature of reality as you see that. And so I think profound moments are there for profound changes. I don't think life is there to break you, but rather to make you. Storms, rather, are not there to break you, but to make you. So I think really it's taking that same playbook of the near-death experience where you're feeling deprived of life, where that rug is being pulled, and recognize the rug that we were standing on was temporary, wasn't real. And I think when you're displaced, you reminded yourself that what I was on, or my nature of reality, and that bubble was being burst for myself to look at things differently and to shed the skin that I was on. And so I think it's very important for people to find transformation behind their setbacks, whether that's the loss of a loved one, illness, anything profound in your life, I think is there to really alter the course of your lifetime on an inner level, reflective on the outer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. And I really like that. I really like that, because whether we've had an experience or not, I don't know, there's so much we need to go through, so much we need to experience and learn in this physical place that we are in and where we're living every day. Definitely.
Right. Well, I think part of the issue is people hold their breath for certain things to happen, or people have expectations of change, of when they will allow themselves to change, what set criteria needs to happen. Things just imploding in flames in front of their eyes and them to alter their state of trajectory. And so I think part of it is when we have expectations, there's a narrow-minded viewpoint on the set circumstances that we miss the everyday miracles around us, inside of us, and all around us. And so I think it's very important for people to not focus so much on the end game or on expectations, but rather finding sacredness on the journey and finding miracles in everyday grace. And I think if you could do that, you recognize that we don't have to take a spaceship or die to go to heaven, but rather we can embody it in this very moment in time with an open heart, open mind, open awareness, infinite possibilities around us. So for me, my near-death experience happened on a routine day, going to a park, and just a regular, very nice September kind of day. But it wasn't in a sense that I needed to go to some ashram to have this. It wasn't like that was a million miles away. I learned that the veil is right here. The veil is inside of us. And the deeper we get, the more that we could have a rapport with who we are and what we're forever connected to.
Yeah, no, I really like that. You're talking about veils, and as you're talking about them, I'm reminded of something that you said earlier in the conversation, which was these overlays. And I've got a very visual imagination. So as you were talking about overlays, I was imagining all of these little, you could call them veils, on someone's life that gives them abilities to experience different things. Do you think that somebody who has a gift of perhaps an intuition gift, they're able to perceive things very well, do you think that that could be an example of a veil or an overlay? And then maybe somebody who has a gift of being able to connect with the other side through whether that's mediumship or channeling abilities, things like that, that could be another example of a veil or an overlay on someone's life?
It's very interesting because I find in many cases that intuition tends to run generationally or within the family. It's hard to find like a medium who doesn't have other relatives or grandparents who doesn't have that too. So it's almost kind of like an intergenerational thing as well. But also I think part of it too was the family dynamic that allowed and nurtured that gift, that didn't judge it, that didn't label it or push it away. And so I think as young children, we all are tuned into, but our lives are very much disempowered because for the majority of us, we're very much reliant on adult figures. And that takes shape in terms of awareness, in terms of worldview, where we tend to put adults synonymous with wisdom. Now, recognizing that we are a lot closer to wisdom than most adults are, freshly from coming from the other side and coming from the world of eternity. So I think family systems that allow, nurture, and harness the spirit in someone without dismissing it, those kids tend to be able to be uniformal and hold on to that, versus intuition, which I think is within all of us, but at times we learn to really doubt that, and we've been disempowered to entrust our linear mind and have more of an obsessive component with the linear mind versus our inner GPS of our life and our inner awareness. But I think we're all born with the gift. It's just a matter of learning how to harness it, and the word is being empowered and finding systems and people around us that are able to uplift our energy field to allow us to remind us of who we are. I think kids are often, their identities is labeled with this blank canvas, and so they push all that stuff away. I know certainly I
Mm,
was one of them with my near-death experience, but eventually, within time, you find almost that through crisis, that foundation is taken away, and eventually the real you comes out from being,
mm,
displaced from your foundation or disanchored. So
mm.
hopefully people, instead of going into despair, could use that to really evolve themselves and to remember their true foundation when that false sense of foundation was taken away.
Yeah, I really like that. And I do see that generationally, if we're open to things, if we don't make a big deal and it's just how it is, then that's how it is through the generations, for our children, our children's children. It's, yeah, really interesting how that all plays out. Jacob, we've talked so much around different things. Is there one key message or one thing that you would like the listeners to hear in relation to your near-death experience?
Hmm? Oh, sure. There's many things, but one of the more important messages is how we are infinitely connected to infinite reality, infinite awareness, and infinite consciousness. I do believe the word infinite has no limitation, and it
Mm,
relates to our very being and our potential within this lifetime. And I think it's important for us to learn to tune into that part of ourselves and to live a life that is listened to, that's guided. And if you can, at any given day, becoming quiet and allowing yourself to listen to the
mm,
eternal doorway of the other realm opening up and allowing some information to come to you in your own way. It doesn't mean you have to go into a channeling session, but I think it's so important for everyone to live a bright, guided life at an everyday moment, to listen to some of those whispers of eternity and some of the wisdom and messages. Because I do believe our greatest currency is wisdom, and it's something that is constantly flowing through us. But sadly, we've blocked off that. And for some odd reason, the linear mind is more attractive to us because that satisfies it. But I think this lifetime is very much about seeing past illusion, reminding ourselves who we are, and remembering that we're here to make an impact. And I think wisdom is the inspiration of the soul, and that's something that we all need. So I think it's very important to get quiet in the still waters of our mind, and the nature of eternal reality will present itself to you. And with that, you don't have to have a near-death experience or go through the
mm,
physical trauma that I and nearly 5 to 10% of the population have experienced. You'll be
mm,
empowered. And I think it's important
mm.
every day to nurture that part of you and to learn to listen to sacred silence as it flows its way through you, altering your worldview and the nature of reality as we see it.
Oh, I love that. The word nurture, that really got me there. It's so about that, isn't it? Nurturing everything, nurturing our gifts, taking time to be still, to tap in, nurture
Mm,
ourselves, nurture the people around us. I love
mm,
it. I really love it. We might just pop on over to our VIP area. I'd love to chat a bit more about the past life regression work that you're doing and
mm.
some of the themes that you're seeing there. Also, a little bit more about spiritual gifts. But Jacob Cooper, I have so enjoyed chatting with you today. There is so much in there. And yes, you were 3 years old, but just the clarity, the amount of information I can, like we've chatted quite a bit. I know that you live this life. I know that this is genuinely you. And I love that. I absolutely respect that. And I just want to say a huge thank you for joining us today. And
Thank you.
thank you for being on the show.
A complete honor. Thank you for having me on again. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay updated with all of the events we have going on and to visit www.letstalkneardeath.com to join the VIP community.